And for this session on weathering the storm, strategies for managing in a turbulent market and navigating the future, which I'm sure we all can't wait to hear. Greg Schoepman is a consultant with FMI, Management Consultants and Investment Bankers for the construction industry. He specializes in the area of productivity and project management, and he leads their consulting practice. He's been a senior project manager for a general contracting firm in Central Florida. He's worked on various projects, medical, pharmaceutical, heavy civil, industrial manufacturing, and multifamily. Has been a construction manager and managed direct labor. He holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Florida, and with a concentration in international business from the University of Tampa. And he is a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, International Facility Management Association, and Leadership Tampa. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right. Can you hear me okay back there? All right, perfect. I usually have no problem projecting. So welcome to beautiful sunny Tampa, Florida. When I actually knew that the SCAA was coming to Tampa, I kind of reached out to Pam because our office, one of our offices, and the one that I lead, is here in Tampa. So to do a hometown gig is a very exciting opportunity. It's good to see everyone again. I know some of your faces look a little familiar because I actually met a few of you a couple years back in San Antonio. So hopefully things have gotten better since San Antonio. Hopefully we're able to take some of those lessons back from that program back to your organization. This program, we're going to rename it because I'm thinking about optimistically here. We're going to call it After the Storm because we're knee-deep in this right now, and no pun intended. I know some of you have been kind of trudging through. Actually, what's funny is I was doing a program a couple weeks ago in Minneapolis, and I woke up in the morning, turned on the news, and the newswoman said, "Welcome to Minneapolis. It's a great day. It's 2." And it took me a few minutes to realize she was referring to the weather, not the news channel. And it was funny because as I sit here and think about the environment that we're currently in and what we're dealing with, you know, whether you call it turbulent, call it stagnant, I think there is somewhat of a tumultuousness in that what's going on right now in this environment, you know, in terms of in the workplace, you know, what we're seeing with jobs, you know, and I know no one in this room has ever said it before, but one of my clients said this just fairly recently. They said, "Greg, there's no way the competition could do it for that." I know no one here ever said that before, but actually I was in one of my clients' office fairly recently, and as I was sitting in their office, got there on a Monday morning, these guys had had a rough Friday afternoon. They lost a big bid. Well, guys were walking around kind of kicking things and just had a big scowl on their face. I said, "Guys, what happened?" They said, "Well, we had a bad Friday. We lost a big bid." Tuesday came, still in their office, much of the same. A lot of scowls, a lot of down faces, a bunch of sour pusses. I said, "What happened?" They said, "Well, Monday wasn't much better. We lost a bid there too." Well, Wednesday came, and by the way, the footnote to all this, every time that they said they lost a bid, it was, we got beat by 15%, we got beat by 20%, we got beat by 25%, with the, there's no way they can do it for that statement at the end of it. Well, Wednesday comes. About lunchtime, I saw some guys, they looked pretty happy. I said, "What happened? You know, what's different today?" And they said, "Greg, we won a big bid. We're feeling pretty good about ourselves. We beat the competition by 32%. And I said, "Wait a second, what's different?" I said, "Do you think they're having similar conversations in their office?" They said, No, Greg, you don't understand. We really had a good bid. We didn't do anything stupid because we knew you'd beat us up if we did something stupid, like didn't put markup on it or actually put our cost in it or anything like that." And I said, "Okay," I said, "but what's different?" And here's the caveat, folks. You know, I'm in some client's office right now and I hear some stupid things happening. Some really stupid things. You know, like I said, people bidding it for 20, 30% lower than what it should be just to get the work, just to keep bodies moving, keep equipment moving. Now the problem is when the music stops, where will they be as an organization? Because now they still have to do that work. And will they be able to pay the piper? So there are folks doing stupid stuff, but here's the controversial statement in this whole thing. As you think about this, this is what I want to challenge you. There are people out there, folks, that are just doing it better than you right now. That's the controversial part. We don't like to talk about that part of it. We like to think that there's no way the competition can do it for that. But here, folks, I'm here to tell you that I see it. I see people that they think there's no way they can do it. They get down, they start putting their heads together, and they come up with a plan to, in fact, beat the competition and do a better job on it and make money. I have plenty of clients, their volumes are down, but their profit margins are up. And folks, that's what we care about. Not the top line, the bottom line. That's what we go to the bank with. So as you think about this next section, this is what I want you to really be thinking about for the next hour. I'm also going to be giving you some homework. Oh boy, you didn't expect to get homework on a Friday afternoon, did you? Well, you're going to get some homework with this particular section, because what I want you to be doing is thinking about your business. Once again, I don't have a silver bullet in the next hour, so I'll give you the opportunity, if you got to head out, to go ahead and find that silver bullet. But what I'm going to tell you, what I'm encouraged at this point in time with this particular section is these things we're going to talk about are contractors being contractors again. You're getting back to what made this industry as strong as it is. I was in a client's office the other day, and they were having discussions, a great pre-job planning session. Pre-job planning that was figuring out what they could do with each line item. Well, we got $500 in this line item, but what can we do it for $400? You're really trying to just figure out a better methods and means to building the project. I've seen clients get excited about cash flow again. What do I mean by cash flow? They're trying to figure out where that money's coming from, and more importantly, how they're doing to collect it. You know, well, this customer, it's 25 days and they haven't paid yet. I have contractors that I've worked with in the past that their average aging receivables was 90 plus days. That's scary stuff. They're using this time now to go back and say, let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to what made us contractors. So I'm kind of excited. Call me a glass half full kind of guy, but I think there's some golden opportunities out there. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to give you a quick review of how we got here. Now, once again, obviously there's a lot of things going on in the environment. I believe I read a statistic the other day, construction unemployment is somewhere around 24%. Now, there are some shining stars. Those of you that do federal work are probably pretty happy. I was with a bridge builder just yesterday, actually, in Alabama. They are doing amazing things. So the moral of the story is, contractors can trend differently than the economy. We can hear all this doom and gloom in the news, and tomorrow I'm going to give you some statistics, if you're around at 9 o'clock, about the economy and what's going on and what some of the indicators are saying. But what I would say is, you can carve your own path. You can create your own direction. And we're going to look at a little bit about strategic perspective. You know, some people say, how can we have a big picture strategy for the next 5 and 10 years? We don't know what the market's going to bring. I might call this section scenario planning. You know, what do we need to do if this happens? What happens if this happens? Asking these rhetorical questions. And then we're going to talk about some best practices on the get work, do work, and keep score front. Really simple. How we go out and get the work, how we execute it, and how we keep score on that game. So most of these names should seem fairly familiar. Now, we got our little friend at the end there, only a couple $1 billion there. You know, the program I did in Alabama yesterday, immediately after my portion of the program, they brought in their kind of cap trust advisor for their 401ks. And they started out with his program pretty much talking about their 201ks. So I think some of you probably recognize this. There's two particular views of the future right now, folks. The first is on the left, that the markets have not stabilized. I don't necessarily agree with this. I actually was at a presentation on Monday morning where the CEO of Dreyfus Corporation came in and kind of talked about general economic climate. What they're saying is that the prediction is you're going to see an uptick. Really, GDP growth is not going to occur in the United States as well as it is outside of the United States. So if there's any international folks in here, there's some good news. The good news is there will be a slight uptick, 3, 4, 5%. But once again, a lot of the overseas stuff is still going to continue to rise. But most of the things that we've heard is that the bottom has fallen. But there is still this, what happens? The credit crunch continues to stall. You know, obviously many of you have seen this. You know, they're not freeing up the credit for us to get the work to start actually building and putting work in place. That's a challenge we're facing. Once again, you know, when you talk to folks like the fellow at Dreyfus, he said that's probably going to be another 9 to 12 months before we start to see that free up. Backlog stagnates, overcapacity. I have a client in Orlando, Florida. This is an incredible story. They're a $300 million general contractor. Basically, as I was asking, they build water, wastewater treatment plants, pretty complicated type projects. They said, Greg, the other day we were shortlisted to 28 people. I hate to see the long list. So the thing is, what is your marketplace? You're probably seeing not only an overcapacity of contractors, what you're also seeing is an overcapacity of unqualified contractors. You know, there's a project just north of us here. It's actually right in front of my house, which is very near and dear to my heart, where the local contractor used to be doing big tract home communities, kind of moving dirt around, and he got into the public works sector. He got into that sector basically because the residential market in Florida dried up. So what did he do? He went ahead and said, we're going to do public works now. Well, he is now bankrupt. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that you shouldn't go try new markets? You shouldn't go try new things? No, but I would say this. Probably the toolkits and the processes that he had weren't commensurate to the new types of work they were talking about doing. Didn't understand what they were getting, and they got lured in. They're kind of following the crowd, which is a very dangerous thing to do. I subscribe to what's on the right-hand side of this slide. First of all, the market shock is largely over. We're going to see an uptick. Now, I'm going to take this question away from you. People always ask me, Greg, when do you see this recovering? Well, the good news is that we'll start to see a little bit more recovery as we go into the late part of this year, early part of next year. We're seeing an uptick in certain markets currently. Now, let me put a big asterisk on this one, folks. When I say an uptick, what I'm talking about is a little increase, not an incredible surge like we saw for the last 5-10 years. So the good news is there is some opportunity. Credit will stabilize for the good contractors. A couple of you before the program, I asked, how you doing? And you kind of scratch your head and you go, we're doing okay. You know, we got a good balance sheet and we're feeling okay. We don't have all the work we'd like. That's a good sign. That's very encouraging. Once again, the credit will stabilize for those folks. The cost of credit, once again, that's going to be a huge impact because it's going to start to squeeze out those mediocre contractors, the ones that don't have a good balance sheet, the ones that have lower margins or maybe bid the work that are now having to execute work at these incredibly low margins. One of the things I would say in this last bullet, the administration and their spending, you know, obviously we saw the stimulus package. We did a survey fairly recently. We asked most of our contractor friends around the country if they're seeing it. I believe it was about 50% of them said they are not seeing any money at this point in time from that stimulus package. Now, some of you in here, I hope, are different. Once again, we just took a kind of a microcosm of the industry to see what was going on. Will that change? Potentially. But I would say there are other things on the table. You know, what they're trying to do is spark some sort of spending. I'm curious to see what the next paradigm will be. Obviously, we hear the big push for alternative energy. Maybe that's the thing to kind of help us, the next big thing. Much like technology was in the early part of the century, maybe it was the residential in that second part of the decade. What is going to drive it now? You know, obviously, diversification is always an option. What got us here, though, and here's the conundrum wonder right now, consumerism. People were using their homes as credit cards. We saw that. It's largely what got us into the mess that we're in right now. So, as people were doing that, you know, we saw the Federal Reserve dropping interest rates to encourage people to buy houses, do whatever it took. Then we saw maybe a little lack of judgment in terms of SEC guidance and oversight. Wall Street kind of fueling that. Ratings agent, basically when you look at these series of circles, what we get into is this downward death spiral. Now, most pundits will say what needs to happen is we need that top circle to kick in again. Isn't it ironic? What got us into the mess is also what most of the experts are saying will help bring us out of the mess, spending again. So hopefully we'll do it with a little bit more prudence and a little bit more wisely, I would say. Here's a first rhetorical statement for you. what does your management dashboard look like? What kind of indicator lights are on your dashboard? How do you make decisions in your business? First thing I'd say is the Architectural Billing Index. The ABI, this is a slight uptick. Now, for this to actually be in the area that we want it to be in, it's in the above 50 margin. So the good news is we're up from about a year ago. Bad news is we're not quite there yet. Now, obviously, when you look at leading indicators, we want the ABI to be up because if they're designing, we're building eventually. When you look at that last piece, we lag 12 to 18 months typically as an industry. So just as you start to hear the administration and Capitol Hill say, the recession's over, everything's swell, and most of you are looking at your backlogs going, I don't know what they're talking about. Well, once again, we lag the industry. Much like a couple of years ago, as I was talking to many of my clients saying, folks, prepare for the storms are coming. And they're looking at their backlogs going, Greg, we don't know what you're talking about, you're crazy. We have more work than we know what to do with. Well, once again, that's working itself out currently. We also publish the Non-Residential Construction Index. I'll be more than happy to email this to you. It's a kind of a blurb and survey that we put in. I think it's actually part of the Wall Street Journal as well. Interestingly enough, once again, what we're doing is very similar. What are people's perceptions in the industry in terms of billings? How are we doing in terms of work put in place? Just some good information. What we're seeing is still a fair amount of fewer large jobs, more trying to do a lot more with less. What I mean by that is we're seeing more retrofit versus big greenfield projects. And obviously still a lot of delays. Once again, it's that credit crisis that we still are trying to, once they start to loosen that up, might allow for a little bit more growth. Now, that's how we got here. We're going to stop talking about it. Not a lot we can do about what's going on out there, but I'd encourage you, what does your dashboard and management look like? Context with the blind man and the elephant, it really depends on where you're sitting in terms of how you define this. Let me put it a different way for you. First of all, we have this thing called context. It's really basic, folks. They're the 4 C's. The climate, what's going on in the marketplace today? What's going on in our industry? The customers. What are your customers' buying decisions? How do they make those buying decisions? The competition, we already talked about we got more of them, and we got a lot of folks that probably weren't doing this a few years ago, or maybe doing something much different. And lastly, company, kind of the internal structure. If we were to do a physical on your business, what would it look like internally? What would be the issues you might have in terms of process, procedure, communication, morale? That shapes the context. Now, you're going to hear this word quite a bit. It's called the new normal. The new normal. Some consulting friends of ours up in McKinsey, up in the Northeast, coined this phrase. They said, this is the new normal. Actually, I just heard on 60 Minutes last Sunday. Same thing. This is the new environment we're going to be dealing with for years to come. That means the strategy that we had for dealing with the old context. What was it like 2 years ago? What was it like 3 years ago? What did your business look like and how did it operate? Well, the context has shifted. We have a whole new context. The question is, do you apply the same strategy in your business today for that context you had 2 or 3 years ago? Does that make sense to everybody? Because as you see this shifting and all new variables that go into it, you have to realize that this context is going to drive that strategy. We actually polled several organizations as part of our strategy in the eye of the storm. And one of the things that we looked at was how well prepared were organizations. I'd say probably most of the folks in the room are, somewhere in that, by that yellow dot right in the middle, maybe even towards that gray dot in the bottom there. The question is, how well prepared were you? Here's another question for you. How well prepared are you moving forward? What do you want your business to look like 12 months from now, 16 months from now? Because, folks, this too shall pass. This economic stuff we're in right now, and I hate to even give it the recognition of being the recession or stagnation or whatever we want to call it, the question is, what is your business going to look like afterwards? Have you already started making preparations? Have you already started thinking about it? So, we have this old strategy. Are you applying that new strategy? Obviously, government regulation. We're going to see more of it. Use of leverage. What do I mean by use of leverage? This is the audience participation part. Obviously, what we're talking about here is using of different vehicles to fund projects. Some of the creative ways that probably fueled some of what the mess that we got into. Competition, seeing a massive increase in competition. Litigiousness, once again, our lawyer friends that are out there, they're going to be quite busy. And then obviously the surety market turbulence. Interestingly enough with this last one, I was actually at a program hosted by a bonding company a couple weeks ago. And as I went through this with them, I asked them this question. I said, guys, I got to ask you. One of the things I'm typically being asked by my contractor friends is, how come we're not seeing the bonding companies operate smarter? And I asked him, he said, well, Greg, we're doing everything we can. You know, obviously we're kind of protecting, or hopefully protecting against the fallout, because some of those folks that can't do the work, I'd say probably by the end of second quarter, beginning of third quarter, fourth quarter, somewhere in that time frame, you're going to start to see some fallout. People that took jobs for low prices that couldn't do it. So there is an opportunity, but as I said before, people are doing some creative things. And I'm not saying creative accounting like the Madoff math or Enron math. What I'm more referring to is being smart about how they execute the projects. So this is that new normal that I was referring to before. About a year ago, and hopefully you can read it up on the screen. I know you have your own slides. But as you look at this, you know, these are the 5 forces that attack our business every day. The threat of new entrants. What we're talking about here is people coming into the business that weren't in the business before. We're not talking about new competition, just to clarify. We have the threat of, the bargaining power of suppliers and the bargaining power of buyers. Once again, those are our customers. Then we have, obviously, the suppliers, kind of pulling at both ends of that spectrum. The competitive rivalry. Obviously, that is what we're talking about, internal competition. And then lastly, the threat of substitute products. That's always considerably low in construction, mainly because there isn't really many substitutes for construction per se. When we look at what's going on today, obviously, the gray circle got much bigger. Competition is much greater. Obviously, not a lot of new folks entering the business. What I mean by that is a lot of folks aren't necessarily coming in from outside of the industry already saying, boy, you know, that thing called construction looks like a good business venture to get into. We're not seeing quite as much of that. And obviously, the black circle on the far right, bargaining power of the buyer. We call this a buyer's market. You guys are experiencing it. I had a client the other day. I was in their office in Manhattan. They said, Greg, a $5 million project today is probably a $3 million project. It's not the same thing. The owners, the customers, the GCs are able to push that down. And that downward pressure, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. But they have that just exertion on us. So the question is, what do you guys do as a business? And this bottom circle, I'd say most of us are probably in this bottom category here. We're going to play the same game. We're going to do a lot of the same projects, a lot of the same work. But we're going to have to do it smarter, more efficiently, better than the rest, focusing on the execution. The other thing we've got is that upper right-hand corner. We can go out and find a new game. We can find a different marketplace. I'll tell you, I did the very similar program to this. This was last January, kind of the kickoff when people were really starting to hit the panic button. I did this program. It was 2 days worth of programs in Chicago. The weather outside was frightful. Let me tell you, it was miserable. It was about 2 degrees, snowing. Inside the rooms, we were talking about construction failure, people, layoffs, bankruptcy. So for 2 days, it was just a depressing environment. Well, it ended up, I had to fly out to California. Now, California, I don't know if we have any folks from California, but it's kind of a scary situation out there. I think they're giving IOUs to their state employees now. And as I went out there, I was talking to my fiance, and I said, Liz, I'm really down. I said, this is really a depressing thing. She said, yeah, most of the programs you do are pretty upbeat. Why are you so down? I said, well, you can only talk about failure for so long before it starts to mess with your head. Well, lo and behold, I go out to California expecting the worst, and it's a small mechanical contractor, about $12 million. I walk into their office. They are happy as all get out. And I said, what are you guys doing? I was expecting some bad things. They said, Greg, we found a new market, a sliver of the market. We're doing DOT work. I said, DOT work? I thought you're a mechanical contractor. Long story short, they found a piece of this market, a very small segment, that their strengths married perfectly to this type of work. Did it fall in their lap? No. They went out and found it, and they were making good money at it. Moral of this story is, folks, once again, companies trend independent of the market. Not just because everyone's talking about failure doesn't mean we have to acquiesce and follow that same path. So, this is the scenario planning that I asked you. What does it look like for us in 2010, 2011? What's your business going to look like? From a scenario plan, how long and how deep? Do we have a strong balance sheet? What do we have in terms of cash reserves? What are some trigger points? What happens if our revenue drops below X? If our revenue goes above X? Do we have those things thought through? Business development plan. This is actually one of my favorite slides because I love that one right there. It says, first of all, finding the right projects, but that second bullet point where it says deputizing non-business development assets. Folks, some of the best business development people in your company are your PMs, your superintendents, your foremen. They're non-traditional in the sense that they're not going to go out and sign a contract, hopefully not, but they have their ear to the ground and they're listening. Are we using them in the right capacity? Are we trying to figure out what's going on in the marketplace the right way? Operations. How well do we do our planning? For instance, do we do good pre-job planning? How do we do in short interval planning? Week to week, 2 weeks to 2 weeks. How do we start each day? Do we start each day with a daily huddle? Or do we just tell the guys to go and get as much as you can get done today? What about exit strategy? As you guys get to 90% on your project, do we start to, maybe we have to switch out a superintendent? Maybe we are just in the punch list phase or kind of cleanup phase? Or do we have a structured closeout meeting, internal, maybe it's external, with our GC or whoever, and say, all right, this is the part where it gets a little stagnant on our project. This is the part where we need to button up change orders. We need to button up our as-builts. We need to start to bring this thing to a head. And if we are making personnel shifts, let's make sure we debrief that new personnel on what the closeout should look like. Exit strategy is a powerful tool, folks, mainly because this is what your customer remembers. It's not how you start, it's how you finish a project. So once again, do you have a good exit strategy in your organization? And lastly, what about post-job review? Do we go back and look at every project we've done, or any project of substance, and say, this is what we did well, and this is what we didn't do well? Or do we only evaluate projects that are failures? I have many a client that we only look at the stinker projects. Well, folks, that's a dangerous precedent to set simply for the fact that, think about the tone it sets. I have a client in Las Vegas that actually did that. They only evaluated the failing projects. You can imagine yourself sitting in your office and you get a call from the CEO saying, hey, Greg, we want you down in the conference room at 2:30 for a post-job review. That's like dead man walking as you're going out of the conference room because you know you're walking into a buzzsaw. Once again, not exactly constructive. So how do we do this and how do we garner the things that we did well? So those 5 things, and then lastly, feedback. Feedback in terms of labor performance. Now, I have many a client, I ask them, I said, how do you know if you're doing poorly on these projects? And one of the superintendents told me, he said, Greg, we know we're doing bad because my boss comes out in a big black Escalade. He rolls up on the job site, he rolls down the window, he just chews my tail. He gets done screaming at me, he rolls up the window, he drives away in a cloud of dust. Wow, that's pretty amazing. I said, well, how do you know if you're doing good on this job? And how do you think he knew he was doing good on a job? Well, y'all work for that company? What's going on? What's interesting is that's largely how we give feedback, because we worry if we tell them they're doing good, they're going to slow down. You know, or they don't believe the information that comes out on job labor reports. I see that all the time. I'm going to expose one of the worst kept secrets in the industry. Those operations managers that are sitting in the room know what I'm talking about. One of my clients, they actually, on this job report, what they did was if they put 1,000 hours in the estimate, the field report or field job cost report they sent out to the field had 800 hours. Because if you tell them there's 1,000, they're going to spend 1,000, right? Well, needless to say, they hired a new project manager. Now, the project manager didn't get this memo that you're supposed to sandbag the numbers or whatever they called it. So when he saw 1,000 in the budget, he put 1,000 in the labor costs, except what did the field think was in the budget? 1,200. Consequently, they lost their tail. And every organization I go into, I see it. Well, we gotta fudge the numbers. This lack of job cost integrity costs money. The other thing that I typically see, and once again, this is rhetorical, is we put in what our competition can do it for, but not what we can do it for. I see this one. This is a funny story. I was working with one of my clients. It was during a lunchtime. And I said, guys, do you mind if I just kind of work in your conference room through lunch? I'm eating my sandwich, kind of checking email. And during lunch, they had a bid that they had to check. So they brought in the plans. It was the chief estimator, the president, and the ops manager. And they're having these arguments. You've probably all seen it in your all's war rooms. You know, the estimator says, well, we got $1,000 in this. Well, the ops manager goes, yeah, we can't put 1,000 because Billy Bob's down the street. He's going to put in 800. Well, let's put in 800. And they confuse themselves to thinking that Billy Bob's cost structure is their cost structure. And this is the funny part. They're going back and forth and like this for about a half hour, arguing about what the competition will put in, not for what they can actually do it for. And about 30 minutes into it, they couldn't come to an agreement on one of the line items. And finally, they turned to me and said, Greg, what do you think we should put it in for? That's a scary thing, folks. I am not an estimator by any stretch of the imagination. So once again, what does your feedback mechanism to the field look like? Is it some convoluted structure, or is there a process that they can see the score of the game? And don't kid yourself, folks, to think that the field doesn't care about the score of the game. They absolutely. Everyone is competitive. How many of you, I know my friends up here were talking about the Olympics. You know, how many of you watched the Olympics just recently? A couple of you. You know, think about this. As you're watching the Olympics, you know, what I found most interesting, other than curling, I watched the heck out of that curling stuff. That was pretty fun stuff. But was that downhill slalom skiing, or was it Super G? Now, I live in Florida. We don't have skiing, thank God. But as I think about that Super G, those people are going down the mountain at 90 miles an hour. But my eyes are glued to that little timepiece in the right-hand corner. And I know everybody else in this room knows exactly what I'm talking about. Whether it's speed skating, luge, bobsled, or whatever else, everyone is just wired to that score. For instance, we're getting ready to go into March Madness. How many of you would watch any of the basketball games coming up in the next couple weeks, especially my friends from North Carolina? How many would watch those games if we just sent 10 guys onto the court, we didn't turn on the scoreboard, and we didn't turn on the clock? Would you all do it? No? Why do we do it to our own people? Lastly, the financial plan. Cash is king. People are remembering once again how important cash is. And if anything, this opportunity we've had has gotten people dialed into where is the money coming from? What about the people beneath us that are maybe have to pay suppliers? Maybe we're sub-subbing out work. You know, are they liquid enough to make sure they can do this work? What gets measured gets done, folks. Measuring the upstream. For instance, all those processes that I just talked about a moment ago, pre-job, short interval, daily huddle, exit, post-job review, guess what? Here's the key to making sure that those things get done. Measure them. Measure compliance. If you start 5 jobs in the month of April, you should have done 5 pre-job planning sessions. It's that simple. Because what these organizations sees is that's what we have to do, because senior management is looking at it. The second you stop measuring that stuff is they go, I guess we don't have to do it. I guess it's optional. Now, we should never think that pre-job planning or short interval planning or any planning is optional, but that's the message we're sending. Unfortunately, what do we measure? We measure safety, very important. We measure financial ramifications like cost, profit and loss. Those are good things to measure, but they're all downstream. Measure the upstream and the downstream. Measure the upstream to influence the downstream. And then lastly, the human resources plan. Communicate who needs to tell what to whom and to when. Once again, over-communicate. You know, folks, unless you're living under a rock somewhere and anywhere, you know it's bad out there. But as senior leaders, and I imagine most of you wouldn't be sitting here if you're not senior leaders, have an opportunity to get with your people on a regular basis. Folks, don't let the water cooler chat really dilute what's going on out there. You have an opportunity to talk to your people. And also, if you're not visible and you think, well, I don't want to tell them bad news, so we just won't talk about it. Folks, if you're not talking about it, they are talking about it. Make sure you add a dose of reality. So actually, I forget what the one quote Winston Churchill said. He said, it's funny, the lies and mistruths are halfway around the world before the truth has an opportunity to get its boots on. And that was before the age of the internet. So, and then lastly, scaling the business based on the dispassionate view of the facts. Fancy word for basically saying a fact-based analysis. You know, there's a lot of emotion in this, but as we look at our business moving forward, I think we're going to get this job. Or there's a job 6 months from now. You have to remove yourself from it and go, is that for the good of the organization? And having that objective view provides a dose of reality. One last thing I'll mention on this one, training and development. You know, as we look at what's going on in the economy, many organizations have cut training budgets. And it makes sense. Probably shooting myself in the foot right now. But you know, they said, we're not going to do training right now. It's a cost we can't spend. I'm going to tell you this, though. You know, the best trainers out there, as much as I think FMI is the best thing since sliced bread, best trainers are sitting in this room right now. And probably didn't cost anything either. But we've said we're going to stop training or we're going to stop developing. That should never stop. Because once again, we still have people on the ground that we have to make sure they have the tools at their disposal. Secondly, we probably have foregone doing evaluations or performance reviews. Why have we stopped doing those? Why? Because we've probably stopped giving raises. I'm sure a lot of your organizations are very similar to just about all the ones I work with. But what we've said there is, we're not really concerned about your development. Once again, how well did you do this past year? And more importantly, what do you want to do this next year? Still having that mechanism there to say, let's sit down and at least just have an informal discussion. Let's talk. I want to hear what you're saying, because when this storm ends, what happens to your talented people? I think the internet and email and everything else and Twittering, I'm probably scared a couple of you when I said Twittering, you know, they're probably out there, you know, they know what's going on, but what's going to happen when the storm ends? So, you know, we also looked at the non-residential construction over the 12 to 24 months, and most of your peers, you know, pretty much are on edge. I mean, it goes without saying. You know, there are many different outcomes that come about. You know, once again, a lot of what-if scenarios, but I think no one has a very particularly rosy picture of what the next 12 to 16 months are going to offer for us. You know, a range of futures, once again, wider range of possible futures, outcomes, unsure of the ultimate outcome. Once again, I think it's pretty common for most of us. Once again, surveying to find out what you're talking about. This is one of my favorite quotes because I think it pretty much sums up what a lot of people are experiencing. Your current strategy is perfect for the results you're getting today. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Okay, we'll move on. Now, as you look at these next pieces, as I said already, from a corporate big picture, I'm just going to kind of go over some highlights because we're coming to the end here. But as you look at this, what's from a corporate bigger picture? You know, who's on the bus? Keeping your banking and bonding company informed, making informed and swift decisions, communicating actions. What kind of KPIs do you have, or key performance indicators? And this is kind of a couple leading and a couple lagging. First of all, I already told you about the ABI, the NRCI, but what's in our pipeline? Do we truly evaluate and grade? You know, do we have some good work in our pipeline? And what I mean by good work is high margin, or do we have a lot of low margin work? And what happens when that burns off? Then we have our backlog quality indicators. So once again, what projects are coming in that are maybe on our radar screen, but what work do we have that we have to churn through? Then some lagging indicators, accounts receivable aging. This is a phenomenal, you can set this dashboard up very simple, having your CFO, having a manager in your organization put this stuff on a sheet so you can evaluate pretty quickly. Decision making, this is the what ifs. What happens after a tier 1 event occurs? Well, that's when we start to maybe not make some capital purchases or vehicle replacements. We're going to kind of curtail some of the meeting and travel. But how many of you have these decisions? This is what I talked about when I said making objective decisions rather than knee-jerk. Now we have something that can kind of help provide some direction for us. The get work truths, this is probably pretty similar when we look at the pipeline or pretty much the funnel of work coming through compared to today. I call this the lines in the water. Once again, a little bit different perspective on getting work. The old way of getting work, I've seen so many companies, it's an estimating churn. Plans come in, we estimate it, we take it off, and we send it out. Unfortunately, we didn't get it. Time to make the donuts, and it just goes through. What about a more concerted effort? A different perspective. Rather than the shotgun blast, kind of a targeted rifle shot. What will differentiate us from brand X or brand Y? What's going to separate us? And let's start to use some sort of a go, no-go scenario. What I mean by go, no-go scenario is, folks, I have many clients that are out there. They got so many lines in the water. They're picking up the big bass, but they're also picking up a bunch of little minnows. They also got some piranhas on there that are going to eat the rest of the fish once they get in the boat. Question is, where do we find the cherry projects, the ones that are really going to differentiate us? Having some type of a decision mechanism that as plans come across the transom in our office, we go that this project fits our organization. This makes sense for us. And it fits it because of these criteria. It's on our risk profile. It fits our strengths as a business. We have the right material, right equipment, whatever it might be. Versus just simply saying, we got to bid this project. It's a quarter mile down the street from our office. We can't let brand X put a sign up out in front. That would be horrible. Once again, we can get those projects, but is it the right project for our organization? Know your cost, as I said. It's good to know your competition's cost if you can get it. And I don't advertise going out internal or corporate espionage. But let me tell you, price for profit and knowing your cost is the way you're going to be successful. Doing some reconnaissance is one thing, but at the same time, figure out what will make you successful. Developing win strategies, refocusing, estimating. Once again, not on being the churn, but what's a differentiator on this project? What can we really sell versus just simply being just another number? And I realize it's hard to do, especially when you're in the climate we are where it is low bid. But I can guarantee you some of you out there are doing some very creative things because you probably, or most of you, are on the critical path on a lot of these projects. What can the team do? Provide some cost feedback to estimating. Once again, at the end of the job, let's get that feedback back to estimating. Let's close the loop on this. Provide intelligence on the competition. Provide intelligence on the customers. What are their buying habits? What are you seeing? Let's talk to the people on the front line. As we go into the do work truths, increases in productivity have a massive impact on the bottom line. A 5 to 10% improvement in productivity can probably double your profit margin. When you think about what a low margin industry, construction as a big picture is, a 3 to 4% market, which is really very low, 3 pennies out of every dollar we get to keep on average. That's pretty bad. When you think about the opportunity, most of you are very labor-intensive organizations. When you improve that labor productivity by just 10%, you can double the bottom line. That's pretty amazing stuff. Proactive processes are better than reactive individuals. Folks, I see many companies. I have a company in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Started working with them. They have 14 project managers, 16 ways of doing things. Every project manager had their own letterhead, had their own fax cover sheets. They didn't need to be called ABC Mechanical. They just needed to be John's Mechanical, Mary's Mechanical, Steve's. That's basically what they were, a $75 million organization of individuals. They actually sent 2 bids to the same customer one time. They lost both of them, by the way, but that's just an important piece to note. The challenge is changing these personal behaviors, because we like this idea of, Greg, you're 100% right. We need to have good best practices, the ABC Steel way of doing things, except when that means we have to change. To illustrate this point, I want everyone to go ahead and cross your arms for me. A couple of you are already doing it. This will wake everybody up too right after lunch. Now look at which arm's on top, left or the right. Okay, some of you are lefty, some of you are righty. Drop your arms to your side. Now go ahead and cross your arms again, but put the other arm on top. Okay, I only have like 10 more minutes. There we go. All right, there we go. The point is, changing the behaviors of the hard work. Folks, I work with my clients all the time developing a tool and a process. That's fun stuff. I get energized doing it. And I know the people I work with get energized. But the rubber meets the road when all of a sudden we're starting a project and we now have to do it this way. That's the challenging part. Once again, as you look at your business, there may be some personal biases, some personal behaviors that are hindering the organization, especially in this new changing market. Developing project communication plans, short interval plans. Notice I didn't use the word schedule. I didn't use the word schedule. I see it all the time. I go to job site trailers that look like interior decorating by Primavera. They got some gorgeous bar charts and everything else. And I ask the project manager in the soup and I say, tell me, what's your plan for this job? And they all point to that. And I look at it and there's a little run date on the bottom. It says 1992. So let me understand, that's how you're executing this project? Folks, the schedule is what you have to do. The plan is how you're going to do it. But it's so funny to see, and it sounds like semantics, but I wonder, if I was to go out to your job sites, do we have the plan, or is it all up here? When you write it down, don't just think it, ink it. Conducting focused daily huddles. Here's another little test for you. Go out to your job site and ask the folks that are on your crews, what's the goal for today? You're going to get one of 3 answers, folks. The first answer goes something like this. I don't know. That's consequently not the right answer. The second one, just as much as I can, boss. Just as much as I can. Folks, as good as that answer sounds, that's not the right answer. I don't know if there are any estimators in the room, but I don't think you estimate just as much as they can get done. Am I correct? There we go. I see a couple nods. Folks, the only answer, it's based on the schedule, it's based on the plan, it's based on the budget. We have to get from column line J to column line M. We've got to install the bridging and all this work. We've got to install so much decking today. Something numerical, something quantitative. That's the goal for today. It's also a great time to talk about safety. Change management. How do we do in terms of dealing with change orders? Do we wait till the end of the job to settle up at the bar with the customer? Or do we deal with change orders as we're going along in a proactive fashion? One of my drywall clients, it was kind of a funny story. I asked them this question. I said, hey, how do you, you say you have problems with change orders. He said, yeah, these no good sticking general contractors, they just don't like us. Kind of had a chip on their shoulder. I said, well, let me see one of your change orders. And hopefully none of you have ever seen a change order like this in your organization, but this actually was one of them. It said miscellaneous drywall, $25,000. That was the change order. And I said, that's it? He said, yeah. Well, you'd sign that, wouldn't you, Greg? I said, I would throw it and rip it out and just get it out of my office. Once again, are we doing a disservice to ourselves? We think we're doing a good job managing, but do we have a process in place to deal with that management? Conducting post-job reviews and good autopsies. Kick finishing. That's the same thing as the exit strategy. We get to that 90%. Some of you, maybe it's 80%. If you're doing a complicated project, maybe 10% remaining on a schedule is not enough. Focusing on flawless execution. Folks, you're probably, just like most of the folks I work with, you're on razor-thin margins. You're going to have to plan this out to a T. Plan and communicate everything. Measure and manage. Find a way. There are things that you can measure. I have many clients. They're just simply moving dirt from pile A to pile B. I have clients that are demolishing floors of hospitals. You know, folks, you do some pretty cool stuff. I was looking at the SEA magazine before I came in. You know, some very sexy projects that are out there. So the point is, if those folks can find a way to measure demolition and dirt, I can guarantee you your foreman, your soups can find a way to measure your work as well. Lastly, some keep work truths. Cash is king. And in case you forgot, cash is king. We're going to keep pounding this and pounding this, understanding that cash flow is the absolute most critical thing we can be thinking about right now. You know, having a detailed 12-month operating budget. Where's the project money coming from? So we get this great grand project. Where's that financing coming through? Managing cash flow daily, intensifying a collection effort. If we just wait till day 30 of the month to start asking, hey, where's the money? Folks, we've probably done ourselves a disservice. Calling as soon as we send in, maybe even sending in a pencil pay app request. Calling a couple of days later to make sure they got it. Calling a week before it's due saying, hey, I just want to make sure we're on track to, come by and pick up that paycheck. Once again, asking the question doesn't hurt. And having that process in place, being the squeaky wheel, gets you on the top of the stack. When we just kind of acquiesce and go, well, we'll see what happens on day 30. These are the clients that I have that are 60, 70, 80 days out and getting that money. Or as I put it, the IOUs. Asking the questions, are we getting paid? I love it when I see superintendents asking a question like, hey boss, do we get paid on this job? That just brings a twinkle to my eye when I think about a superintendent asking about, are we getting paid? That means they have a business sense. When I hear project managers say, that payment stuff, that's accounting's job, that makes my stomach just curdle. We have to have everyone focused on getting paid. Knowing your purchasing strategy. How do we buy materials? How do we buy maybe the consumables on our projects? Do we have a strategy, or is it all reactive? So, the bright side of this turbulence. Folks, the sky isn't falling. People are making money. People are doing quite well, and I'm sure a lot of you in this room are just like that. Yeah, our volume's down, but our profits are up, and that's a good thing to be. Taking this time to refocus, using this weekend, because I guarantee you're probably not going to be doing anything outside, going back to your hotel room and kind of looking through this, and this is the homework. These are some what I call roundtable discussions that I want you to have, spending time with your teams when you get back to your home offices. What are our best practices as it relates to strategic direction? Business development, what are things that we do that maybe the competition does? Here's another question. Do we have best practices? How do we execute? Is there a brand X steel erection way of doing things? Or do we just kind of wing it? Do we have 14 ways of doing things? And then this is what I really want you to do, this personal reflection, as I call the action plan workbook. Looking at strategy, execution, and organization. First of all, as a senior level leader in your organization, how do you spend your time? If you're the president and CEO of your organization, do you spend your time in the weeds, or do you spend your time doing kind of big picture items? I have many of my clients that are down wrenching on the engine room, but unfortunately, no one's up at the helm figuring out where the ship is going, and the ship's headed right towards an iceberg. So asking yourself some questions, how much of the time do you day spend in tactical issues? How much time do you spend in the big picture? Does your firm have a mission, vision, and values? And I'm not necessarily talking about the things on the back of your business card, but do you have a true, what I call beacon, that everyone's dialed into in your company and how they make decisions? What do you want your organization to look like in 5 to 10 years? I see some gray hair in the room, not to pick on anybody, but do you have succession? Have you figured that out? Folks, that's a 5 to 10 year process. Not only because we got to find the right people, maybe it's a cash issue, but all these pieces of the business, have you started thinking about that? And maybe for the younger folks that are younger people in the business, what do we just want the business to look like? Do we want it to be the same? Draw this in terms of a picture. Sometimes we get hung up on dollars. What would we see as being the ideal organization? Describe your current marketplace. What would you say is your market share? Are you 50% of the market? Or do you have 20 of your closest friends bidding on every single project? What do you know about your current competition? What are the strengths of your team? And here, folks, I'm going to take one away from you because I'm that kind of a teacher. Don't put people. That's not a strength. And it sounds counterintuitive because I guarantee you everyone in here has great, great people. So the question is, what's a differentiator? Assuming brand X and brand Y have great people too, just like you, what's going to separate you from that pack? What areas of improvement? You know, maybe some things we're not so good at. This is a tough question right here that I think a lot of my clients often struggle with. Does the current team you have capable of achieving the vision you wrote 2 pages earlier? What areas are required to change and achieve that long-term vision? What processes would you say are brand X your best of class way of doing things? How much inefficiency do you have? Maybe put it as a percentage. Do you think you're 5% inefficient? Do you think you're 1%? You know, I call this opportunity. Once again, glass half full Greg. What processes are absence of? Those 5 that I keyed on before. Do you look at it and go, yeah, we got 2 of them, but maybe 3 were a little lapse in? How much time is spent by your associates in training? Do we spend a lot of time training? Do we spend a lot of time on field assets getting them not just safety training, but what about skills training? What about business acumen? Is there a company X way of completing your projects? And what, and I'm going to add something here, or who might be the biggest stalwart? You know, sometimes that's maybe someone in your organization. Well, you know, Butch is never going to do this stuff. That's something you're going to have to confront as you try to change an organization. I've given you an action plan to start writing these things down. So after you go through your homework assignment, and it's all due at 4:30 today, I might add, what my expectation is as you look at this, you know, you go back to your business. Hopefully you'll do this and do some serious reflection on your business. Because now you can start attacking them and knocking these things off your action plan. Folks, as I said already, there are a lot of very, very positive things going on right now. And the good thing is the future is very bright. So I know I'm at the end of my time, but I do want to take a couple minutes, maybe answer any questions that the group may have. I answered them all. Any? Well, I'm going to stick around. As I mentioned already, we have several publications. I'll be more than happy to email any of you. I think you got the slides, but if you didn't, I don't even mind sending you this as well as tomorrow's program. But short of that, I wish you the best of luck in 2010 and 2011, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great afternoon, folks. Stay dry.